Excellent. Thank you, Judy. Welcome, everyone. So, members, I declare the Adelaide Parklands Authority meeting open and advise that the telecommunications meeting of the board will be streamed live to the City of Adelaide website, and a recording will also be published to the internet. Please note that an audio and visual recording is being taken of this meeting. This means that your presence at and any contribution that you make to the meeting may be collected, used, disclosed, or published publicly by the Council, including transfer outside of Australia. Acknowledgement of country. Adelaide Parklands Authority acknowledges that we're meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pays respects to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and acknowledge that they're of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. We also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations who are present today. Members, I have no apologies. That takes us to item 3 on the agenda, which is the confirmation of the minutes from the 7th of May. So I'll seek a mover and a seconder, members, to confirm the minutes. And if you can do that by your electronic hand, that would be appreciated. Thank you, Stephen. And a seconder? Thank you, Craig. Are there any questions or alterations of the minutes? If I can actually ask you to, Stephen, if I'll just pop your hand down, your electronic hand, and then I can see if anybody has any queries or alterations. No? If not, I'll put the motion to confirm the minutes to the vote. If those are in favour, please raise your physical hand, and that would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I'll ask for raise hands for those against. That is carried. Thank you. Members, that takes us to item number 4, which is the presiding members report. I don't actually have a report to give tonight other than to thank you all for your participation in the planning meeting that we had the other week, and I look forward to the strategic planning that we'll do in a few weeks' time. That takes us to item number 5, which is the Executive Officer report. Martin, do you have a report? I'll unmute you. No. Judy, you'll have to unmute Martin because it's not allowing me to mute or unmute members. Hello. There we go.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just two items to draw to your attention. Firstly, the City of Adelaide is now a member of the World Urban Parks Organisation. This is an international organisation set up to further the interests and aspirations of urban parks and urban park managers around the world. And I'm hoping that'll prove of benefit to both City of Adelaide and APLA as well. The other thing is just to remind you that we have the next planning session for this strategic plan on the 18th of June, and we'll aim to get a draft out to you for consideration on the 16th, so you've got time to think about it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Members, that takes us to Item number 6 on the agenda, which is deputations. There are no deputations this evening. Item number 7 is presentation workshops, of which there are 2 presentations tonight. The first presentation, which is item 7.1, is from the University of Adelaide, the proposed sports master plan for Bulrush Park, Wapunga, Park 10, and Red Gum Park, Karawira, which is Park 12. I'd like to invite Ray Schubeck to do an introduction, and then we have Jeremy Kwan, accompanied by Michelle Wilson, who will be speaking to us tonight. So, Ray.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you.
Thanks. Michelle and Jeremy from the Adelaide University are going to walk through a master plan that they have developed for the areas that they lease and license in Parks 10 and 12. As is the case with many of our parklands lessees, they're under increasing pressure to provide appropriate facilities for their members and the broader community. They are seeing strong growth, particularly in women's and junior sport, as well as their own clubs. And they're also trying to accommodate demand from the nearby Adelaide Botanic High School, which is, I guess, originally was unplanned for and has come on board over the last couple of years. And they're obviously seeking space for physical activity, for physical education and sporting purposes close to the school. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to enable for you to hear directly from the university with regards to the challenges they are facing and to get your thoughts on potential responses to these challenges. We will then follow up with a presentation, follow this presentation with a report to you and council in the coming months to I guess form our response to the master plan. And I'll now hand over to Jeremy and to Michelle to walk you through the master plan.
Thanks, Ray. Just try and share the screen, I think. Excellent. So thanks very much for having us. As introduced, I'm Michelle Wilson. I'm the General Manager of Adelaide University Sport, and we have Jeremy Kwan from our infrastructure branch of the university. Whilst most of you would be aware of the University of Adelaide, I just thought it might be worth spending 30 seconds or so just going through what Adelaide University Sport is. And I'm just voting for the screen. Seems to be cooperating. There we go. So Adelaide University Sport is a small not-for-profit organisation. So effectively, we deliver sport, recreation and fitness for the university, but we have a long 124-year history. We have 35 affiliated clubs currently, and they range from everything around social sport, competitive sport, right up to the elite level. So we have the traditional, football, cricket, lacrosse, those sorts of things, but we have ultimate frisbee. We have a whole range of different sports. We look after and manage those facilities, which include those that we lease or license from Adelaide City Council. We look after everything from line markings, managing bookings from the community. And we're also responsible for the maintenance of the various buildings, including the grandstand at Park 10 and 12 and the Graduates Clubhouse. As introduced by Ray, we have seen a significant increase in junior and women's sport over the last few years, but also an increase in multicultural community use. So we have a lot of specific multicultural groups that access the green space for structured, but also just unstructured sport and as a bit of a meeting place for physical activity. So a little bit about us. I guess from a structure perspective, we have around about 5,500 formal members, and that sort of changes anywhere throughout the year depending on seasons of sport. I guess interestingly, or what might not be known, is only around about half of those are actually students of the university, and many of those are actually members of the general community, with a reasonable proportion of those now being junior members. Of the sports that actually utilise the North Adelaide parklands, we only have 3 of those at the moment that are able to offer junior sport, and that's just really around a lack of facilities and access to green space at the moment. So we definitely want to be able to support that, and that's part of the reason that we've worked on this master plan. I guess interestingly as well is a lot of those junior members are young people that are living in and around the North Adelaide Parklands as well. I'm going to hand over to Jeremy quickly.
So I guess in the context of this one, the university holds the lease and the licence for Adelaide University Sport. As Michelle said, Adelaide University Sport manage and look after the parks that we lease and licence. They manage the bookings. We've held those licences and leases, I think, for at least 100 years. I'll be honest, I don't have all of the details on when some of these buildings were first commissioned and built. We've done some upgrades on them over time, but in the last 5 or 6 years, our expenditure on refurbishments and redevelopment has, I guess, been constrained a little bit by the heritage nature of some of the buildings, the age of other facilities, and the constraints around footprint, which we'll go into a little bit further as we go through this.
So as Jeremy kind of alluded to, expenditure is becoming problematic. We do hire out our grounds and the buildings, in particular Graduates Clubhouse, to community groups and those sorts of things. And we receive about an average of $60,000 a year in hire fees. But then I guess conversely, our current expenditure is around about the $485,000 mark, which encompasses rent, utilities, the grounds maintenance, and keeping the green spaces to the quality that they are. But it doesn't include things like cleaning, security, and the ad hoc additional works, which are, I guess, starting to increase around the age of some of those facilities. I guess the other thing just on that is that it is really fantastic that we are able to hire out the facilities, but we're actually at the point now where we're having to knock back bookings because we don't have unisex change rooms, and that's something that we'll touch on in a moment.
The other one on that, which we didn't put on here, is expenditure on, I guess, new facilities. So things like the graduates change rooms, which were built in 2012, 2013. I think $4 million that we spent on that, which came largely from student contributions. We haven't included any of that type of capital works in any of the calculations that we've done here.
So in terms of the intention of the master plan, as Ray sort of alluded to, the intention really is around improving equitable participation and enabling a greater number of community members to use the facilities and to access appropriate facilities. We have a wide range of people that want to use the parklands, everything from, community cricket, as I mentioned before, but we had some interest earlier, late last year now, for the women's T20 cricket that happened early this year. And unfortunately, we were unable to proceed with that because we just didn't have women's change rooms or unisex change rooms that were appropriate. So I guess in terms of the master plan, we've looked at reviewing the location of our sports fields, but then also looking at proposed facility upgrades and also the location of those facilities to ensure that they're best placed for that multi-sport use. In developing the master plan, I guess, we've looked at alignment with the Adelaide Parklands Management Strategy, which has been endorsed by the Adelaide Parklands Authority and then adopted by the Adelaide City Council and State Government. And we've really looked at incorporating the needs of Adelaide University sport to support and increase participation in community use. In particular, our master plan, I think, links in nicely with 3 themes of the strategy around activating the parklands, around creating a sense of vibrancy with a range of events and activities that support community, and valuing the parklands, and in particular respecting and celebrating the heritage nature of some of those buildings. taking a little while. There we go. So in terms of the current use of our facilities, and just to give a bit of an idea, the average number of monthly formal bookings that we receive at Park 10 is around about 200, and at Park 12, 130. This could be anywhere from a 1 hour booking to a 3 hour booking. And we also have on average 35 bookings per month for the Graduates Clubhouse, which is the building on the bottom left-hand side there. And that is often our clubs, but also we have the childcare centre across the road that have used it, people using it for community presentations and those sorts of things. Those numbers don't include the annual agreement that we have with Botanic High School, who have a permanent booking during school hours at Park 10, and that's for their lifestyle choices or physical education classes. They have expressed an interest around having improved change facilities and public toilet access, as well as storage, which has been included as part of the master plan. I'll also just draw your attention to the right-hand column, which is around the number of non-AU sport bookings. So we've had everything from the AFL Indigenous Summit, Unisport Nationals for cricket. We have a very regular booking with the Blind Cricket Association and a number of junior cricket and football groups that use the facilities. And I guess, you know, we want to be able to encourage that growth in women's sport that we're starting to see as well. Our cricket club currently have a women's team, and as do our football club, but we are at the point where we don't have any facilities to support that ongoing growth.
The other part of that is the fields are available for general public use at any time when they're not booked. That does cause some frustration at different times, which we are aware of and we try to manage. But we have no restrictions on, and we don't ever want to place any restrictions on any other use of those fields when they're not being used for formal bookings.
So just to give you an idea of what the current sports fields look like, so Park 12 being on the bottom left and Park 10 on the right hand side, you can see the range of sort of formal sports that we have there. At the moment, tennis is a little bit limited because we only have the grass courts, and we had some interest from Tennis SA last year around working together on some hard courts there. We definitely find, particularly from the multicultural community, there's a want and a need for hard court tennis courts, and we find lots of people wanting to access them, but when they find out that they're grass courts, it does become problematic. What we are looking to do as part of the master plan is to consolidate some of those sports fields into a more efficient use of the green space, which we'll get to in a moment. So in terms of current challenges, and I've sort of, you know, we've alluded to the facilities, but I think Jeremy's probably going to be able to better speak to some of those challenges.
So I guess current facilities and the work that we did with our consultants when we started looking at the master plan was looking at the facilities that are there, what we have great control over, such as the surface conditions of the playing fields, and the one that we're really struggling with, which is the condition of the change facilities and the spaces for umpires and others. You know, the change facilities in the building are generally constrained by the size of the buildings and the area within the building footprint that we can actually make available to those change facilities. And they are very much a reflection of the time when they were built. There's virtually no cubicles for any of the showers. I don't think there's any. There's often single showers in a change room that's for or used by 20 or so people. The umpire facilities are shared and do not cater for male and female umpires. And we've also got, I guess, other training elements such as gym equipment and weights and other things wedged into the buildings because that's the only space that we've got within the parklands. Just in Park 10, the Graduates Clubhouse certainly has some fantastic new facilities in it. There's 4 great unisex change rooms in that building. There's a public toilet in that building which we maintain and we manage for users of the running track and general community. Park 12 we've got, and over at Park 10 we've also got the grandstand, which we often get questions about whether the toilets in that are available to the public, and at the moment they're not. They're located within change rooms that we use for storage, and they're aged. They're also in the middle of the sports field, so that one we only make available to our users. At Park 12, similar situation. We have the Park 12 grandstand, which has some fairly old change facilities in it now. I think they were built, or they were last updated in the mid 2000s. And they're again constrained by the footprint that we've got. And as a heritage listed building, we've also got issues with disability access to the viewing areas within that grandstand, and the small bar cafe area that's in there as well. We do also have the hockey change rooms on that park, which we had previously flagged to demolish as part of the Park 10 graduates building, as part of the footprint makeup that we were trying to balance. But at the request of council at that time, we've retained that. We have done some work to improve the change, or the toilets and the facilities in that building, but it is limited. There's one shower and one toilet in each of the change rooms.
So this slide just really summarises the challenges, I guess, in relation to the space. So it is, you can see there, for example, that the football ovals are separated by distance and the club rooms are down in the bottom left-hand side, but we have 2 football ovals up top there, and it doesn't really help with volunteering and sort of managing the teams very well. We've got issues around drainage and ground quality, the lack of hardcourt tennis courts, which I spoke to before. Lighting is an issue and is something that often comes up by the general community and people using the running track, and just having safe or spaces that feel safe for the community to exercise. Car parking, the quality of the facilities, which we've definitely touched on. So that's just a general kind of summary there.
We do also find that the male and female public toilets, particularly at Park 12, end up or become the default public toilets for Peace Park and other areas of the parklands. And we do get quite a few complaints about the quality of those facilities and the age of them in particular.
I think one of the strengths of Adelaide Uni Sport is its history, and particularly with our football and cricket club, those clubs have been going for many, many decades. And sport has this amazing ability to connect community. But unfortunately, with the facilities that we have out at the grandstand, everything is located on the 2nd floor, and there is no access for people that might not be able to walk up the stairs. That's something that both those clubs in particular have expressed a strong interest in, being able to share that kind of community aspect of sport and have people come and participate and watch equitably. So in terms of the proposed, I guess, response, and I might let you start off with this one, Jerry.
Yeah, so I guess at Park 10, we're certainly proposing some improvement to the facilities, particularly at the eastern end of the park. The graduates club rooms at the western end are fabulous, and we're not looking to do any further changes there. But at the eastern end, we see an opportunity, or we would like an opportunity, to either redevelop the grandstand and expand it so that we can fit in more contemporary compliant change facilities, potentially with public toilets, but also to extend the number of fields and pitches that are serviced. We've got the tennis courts there, there's a number of soccer fields, there's a number of cricket pitches. There is a lot of training that happens there. There's a lot of people that use the running track who are looking for certainly toilet facilities, and in the master plan, we've certainly identified a need there, and we've looked at what sort of increase in space we think we would need to provide something which services AU Sports members and the community better. Look, just generally, I think we've said at the moment we think it's about 80 square metres of additional built footprint we would be looking for at that end of the parklands if it was an extension of the current grandstand. But we are open to other ideas around how facilities can be developed or delivered. Some pictures.
So this one just really shows the allocation of, or proposed allocation for sports field changes. And again, it's just about trying to have a more efficient use of the green space and manage wear and tear over both summer and winter. And you can see there where we're looking at the new change room facilities and public toilets as well.
So this one's Park 12. So again, at Park 12, we've identified the current buildings. We've also looked at what some of our opportunities or options might be in terms of providing better facilities and amenity. We've been in discussions certainly with Ray at council about how that might be done, but we haven't, I guess, landed a particular direction that we would go. There's certainly options to build new standalone facilities, which is probably in a lot of ways easier when we're dealing with the heritage grandstand at Park 12. But we've also looked at where facilities could be sited. And if you look at that one, number 8 on that slide is a proposal where we could potentially build a new change facility that is closer to Botanic High, but also services multiple ovals rather than having all of the change facilities bunched up on the western side of the park, which is problematic for multiple teams when they are trying to use all of the fields at the same time.
And again, just in terms of the sports field changes, I guess we're looking at reorienting the existing sports fields, and some of this is currently occurring and has been approved by the council on delegation. So that's really about sort of consolidating the football in particular to that end. It's particularly important that the men and women compete or play on the weekend together, and they're not sort of seen at opposite ends of the field. And we're also looking at lighting improvements as changes of use increase. There's some potential to relocate the cricket nets to allow for that third oval, which is in the sort of shaded red there. The cricket nets are extensively used by the broader community, by aspiring cricketers, junior cricketers, multicultural groups, etc. So they're definitely something that we look to retain and have both hard and turf nets there.
And look, in terms of built area, and we've done a few blocking plans just to get an idea about what sort of space we need. But at Park 12, in total, to provide the number of change facilities that are required to support multiple teams playing on the 3 ovals at the same time, it's a total footprint area of about 300 square metres across at least probably 2 buildings, but again, that's where we are looking for feedback and guidance from the Parklands Authority.
And I guess, as Jeremy sort of said, in terms of where to from here, we're really just looking for some feedback around some of those design proposals, but we're certainly aware of the sensitivity around increasing footprint and building work within the parklands, but we are challenged, I guess, in terms of using the existing buildings and ensuring that they are compliant with modern day standards. I don't think that it's something that, you know, we want to continue to say no to groups because we don't have cubicles for women to use and that the change rooms just have urinals in them. I think, you know, it's something that we definitely need to address, but how we address that, I guess, is where we're looking for some feedback. We're certainly looking to increase our ability to support the general community use as well in terms of public toilet access, but other organisations as well as that closer access to Botanic High. So yeah, I guess it's sort of open to some dialogue around that before we really go into commissioning any design proposals or anything like that.
The work we've done on the master plan is setting out some principles. It's trying to set out the needs that we're responding to. It is a document that will evolve. You know, things have changed enormously since we started work on it probably 2 years ago. I think the consistent thing from as it's evolved is the growth in women's sport and the number of students and community users that we're seeing of the sports fields. So I guess that's our presentation. We're after any comments, feedback. Certainly happy to address any questions that any of the members may have.
So members, if I can ask you to raise your electronic hand. We've got a few little things we're trying to work through with this Zoom tonight. So if you could raise your hand, when I call your name, I'll ask you to unmute yourself. We've just changed the mute buttons. So Stephen. Where are you, Stephen? There you are.
I'm here. I was just unmuting myself, which is not as straightforward as it seems. Look, that was great. I didn't have a copy of the presentation. I couldn't find it. Doesn't mean it wasn't sent. What was it sent? Just a clarification.
No, it wasn't.
No.
Okay.
No.
So I mean, the trick with that is I'm on a small screen. So look, just three questions, and look, it was really interesting. I understand exactly what you're saying, especially in terms of the facilities being set up for blokes in the olden days. So there's just a question. I don't understand what University of Adelaide sports is. So you've got Adelaide University Sport, which you've told us is a not-for-profit, and I guess most sporting bodies are notionally not-for-profits. They don't give dividends to shareholders. But I am interested in how you are constituted and what your purpose is under your constitution. I imagine you have one. So that I don't quite understand. And look, two other questions. Just some insight into the collaboration and dialogue that you're having with the education department, especially in relation to Botanic High, but more generally, and I guess the relationship with commercial sport. And you mentioned Tennis SA, and I realise these things are never black and white, but I'm just curious. So three questions. One about the purpose under your constitution. Second about collaboration, particularly with the education department, and the third more generally about relationship with some of the more commercial players in sport.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. So Adelaide Uni Sport is, it does have a constitution, you're correct. And we were established 124 years ago to be, I guess, an affiliate body of the various university sports clubs at the time. And at that time it was boat or rowing, lacrosse and tennis, and it's grown over time to currently include 35 clubs. Our role really is to deliver sport, recreation and fitness to the university community. So that is students, but it's also alumni. And for a number of our clubs to be able to compete, they need to have junior membership. So that has expanded over time, I guess. Does that answer that part of your questions?
Yes, sorry, it's a touch screen. It's very touchy.
And I'll let Jeremy do the other.
So with the Education Department, there's been ongoing discussions with the Education Department since probably about 12 months before Botanic High opened. And we've engaged with them very openly. We've certainly tried to make the sports fields available to them as much as we can. Some of the clubs have probably gone beyond their remit a little bit with the people that they've talked to. Michelle has some challenging members because of their, I guess, position within Adelaide society and the Adelaide community, and they do take things into their own hands. But we have a really good relationship with Botanic High at the moment, with Alistair Brown over there and the Education Department. We are talking to them about how we can share some of their facilities as well. They have a great basketball court, which we would like to have a bit of access to, but we have part of the reasons for changing some of the sports fields has been, or realigning them, has been to try to make fields available to Botanic High that are closer to the school. And the biggest limitation that they are seeing, I believe, is around the proximity to toilets that are lockable and manageable by them during the school day because of the constraints that are placed on them by the Education Department. So it's a good 10-minute walk, I suppose, from the school to the fields that they use the most, and the change facilities there are very important. Sorry, and the other one, we will provide this presentation and the master plan if you would like, back through. We're challenged, I suppose, with Zoom as well. And
yeah, Jeremy, they will be, the presentation will be provided with the minutes. The third part of the question from Stephen was around your relationship with the other sporting codes such as Tennis SA.
So I guess it does depend a little bit on the code and the club that we have. So we've got quite a good relationship with SACA as an example. They utilise our facilities quite a lot, and they expressed an interest to partner with us to update the Park 12 grandstand to modern day facilities. And I guess with Tennis SA, whilst we don't have a competitive tennis club, it's more a social tennis club, they had expressed an interest to partner with us on upgrading the tennis courts there to enable them to have a practice venue for the Adelaide International competition that was started earlier this year. So it's definitely something that we definitely want to expand upon those. And I think, yeah, Adelaide City Council, we're going to contribute towards the hard courts there, but the other side of the funding, the state government fell over at the last minute with that one. So it is definitely something we're keen to explore. It does depend a little bit on the state sporting organisation, I guess, as well.
Okay. Members, I'll just see if there's any. I have Stephanie and then Craig. And then a few more, but I'll go to Stephanie, then to Craig first.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I've got a few questions and comments to go through. I guess the first one, I'm assuming at the end of the day, I saw a number of different figures there, but the number of increased footprint was landed on 300 square metres, is that right?
Square metres.
Is that right?
yes, I think certainly Park 12 it was 300. I think it was about 80 at Park 10.
Oh, so there was 300 plus 80 at another park? Okay. And
that's the presentation had 200 and then 100. So you're telling us different.
Oh, sorry, no, if that's what it was, sorry.
No, that's for
I think Park 12, we certainly had flagged around 300 square metres of additional footprint. And Park 10, there was also about 80 square metres that we calculated based on meeting the requirements of the sporting codes that we're trying to support.
So that's different to what we saw on
Yes.
PowerPoint. Okay. And essentially,
I think it was on different slides.
Yeah, they're different
Sorry.
slides. Yeah.
okay. And essentially, is that all for change room, toilet, etc. type facilities, or are you also incorporating aspirations for, you know, social uses like licensed areas or
No, yeah,
gathering areas, etc. I just want a bit of an idea without going through it all of whether it's essentially for that kind of facilities or is it also for club rooms and gathering areas?
it is just the change facilities and the public toilets. That does include storage, first aid, and umpires' rooms that are mandated as part of the relevant state sporting organisation requirements. But certainly not any further licensed facilities or anything like that. It's very much about supporting the actual participation in sport.
Cool. Okay. The second area I was interested in was, you know, you were obviously flagging that you may be able to do extensions to the existing heritage grandstand or you could do independent separate facilities, and these are both areas that you're exploring. Obviously that I'm not sure whether that grandstand is listed state or local or whatever it is, but have you been getting advice on how you might approach extensions in a sort of sensitive to heritage fashion? Because obviously there are ways of doing that that can work and there are ways that can't, and I just wondered if you'd been getting any advice around that.
We had some very early advice on that. I'm not sure if we had that from Council or from Heritage SA, but certainly from Heritage Consultants that have looked at the building. Pretty sure the Park 12 grandstand is, actually I can't remember if it's a state or if it's state heritage. I'm pretty sure it's a state heritage building. But I guess part of this is trying to understand what is preferred by the authority in terms of how we might develop. So we haven't commissioned designs or architects to do a huge amount of work on this. We're trying to get a direction to follow it, and then we would commission it. But certainly, if it was work on the heritage buildings, we would expect it to be done by appropriately qualified consultants and to be sympathetic to the heritage of that place. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd be interested to hear from Heritage SA about what their preference might be, because they would have a much better idea of whether it's feasible to extend the building without impacting on the heritage and so on. So that would just be a comment I would make, that it would be good to have that information. My next point was just generally, you talked about 50% usage by uni students and 50% non-uni or half-half. And then you did make a reference to public use, but I was kind of curious to understand how the public gets access and what percentage of the time they would have access, and would the public have access to the toilets and so on?
So the public toilets are currently opened at both Park 12 and Park 10, and they are opened by either our ground staff or our security team members, depending on whether it's the weekend or the weekday. It's fair to say that there's a definite interest from the community to have public toilets in the eastern end of Park 10, up where our old grandstand is. I guess with general community use or non-booked space, there's always people out there utilising the uni loop. There's informal sort of athletics training and informal soccer and like families playing and those sorts of things. The figures that I put up there are just booked hours, I guess, of time. And it would be fair to say that soccer in particular has over 41 bookings a week. not just our club, but other soccer users. But there is a lot of informal soccer that happens as well, because our goals are always out there. There's often community groups and families and those sorts of things. I guess one thing that we haven't really done is any sort of study around the general community use. We just have a good idea of the booked times that are there. But certainly, you know, particularly during school holidays and those sorts of things, the childcare centre on McKinnon Parade often use the green space. That's not a booked time. It's just, you know, using the parklands for the purpose of, you know, of being active.
And do you have to knock a lot of people back, like, you know, community soccer groups or something, because they're being used by the university? Just, do you know roughly, just to give us a feeling?
I think like weeknight use is definitely probably at capacity at the moment where we've got lighting. So that's why part of the master plan is about increasing the lighting, because not all of our fields are lit. It's not so much that we have to knock people back during for sort of community, like anyone can book our facilities. It's not just our university clubs that can utilise the space. If we are knocking people back or people don't proceed, it's generally around lack of change space or female-friendly change rooms, and that's usually by bigger groups as opposed to general community.
Okay. Stephanie, I've got 3 other people waiting, so I might move on and then come back if you've got any other questions.
Really quick point, if that's okay, just about hard court versus lawn courts, or come back to that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. I just wanted to make sure everybody got a turn to speak.
Sure. Yeah, that was the one thing that did just raise a little bit of alarms for me, was because I appreciate how rare maintained lawn tennis courts that are accessible to everyone are. And also noting that there's a whole lot of revamped hard tennis courts that exist already over at Tennis SA next to Next Gen Gym. So I was just going to comment that would be something that I would be a little bit wary of, is you know, losing lawn courts to hard courts.
Yeah. And we've just done the clay courts on the opposite, diagonally opposite as well, on the other side. Craig, I have you next, then I've got the Deputy Lord Mayor, then Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. And really appreciate the opportunity of you coming early, so we actually can have these kind of discussions. I think it's a really useful process, so we can tease out some of the issues. Certainly recognise the tension you've got. Clearly, there is a lot of extra demand and some great activity going on. And as someone who's actually played on those sports fields before, I totally recognise my privilege in being a male and being able to have access to change rooms and toilets while others can't. So yeah, there is a powerful case there in terms of updating of facilities. But as you quite rightly point out, there's also that tension around footprint. I mean, from my quick calculation, there was the 300 metres plus the 80 square metres plus hard courts plus car parks. You're starting to add up to quite a significant increase in hard surface. And that's something that would be a real tension for us. There is no doubt. So anything that can minimise that would be strongly recommended. And yeah, I was also going to mention around the hard courts, the fact that there seem to be alternatives around. And so it is a significant increase in hard services. I'm just thinking maybe in terms of, and this is probably a broader consideration in terms of our work, is that if there is a proposal which does involve an increase in footprint, one potential pathway for us to consider is significant offsets elsewhere in terms of reclaiming parklands to green space. So that might be one thing to consider if there are opportunities elsewhere in terms of your lease area or adjacent areas that could be put into a package, which would make it more convincing for us that that we could consider some increase in hard surface.
Thank you. I think just on that, car parking is one that has come in and out. I don't think at this point we would be looking at developing certainly any additional car parking is anything that we're proposing here. It had certainly come up at one time around realigning a roadway because that is a hard surface, and we thought we could reduce the hard surface by realigning that roadway, but the intention hasn't been to build a car park.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know what the square meterage of the hard courts would be, Jeremy?
I don't off the top of my head. We probably have it in some notes, which we'll scramble through over the next few minutes if you've got any other questions.
Yep, I will go to the Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for the presentation. It was quite detailed, but not having it ahead of time makes it difficult to give the most considered feedback. What I'm interested in is the mention of potentially, was it a synthetic soccer pitch? Was that correct?
Certainly at one time we had a synthetic soccer pitch in there. That was about carrying capacity for the field. I guess Michelle and I have been talking about that. That's one that, to be honest, I don't think we would ever be able to afford. And I think it's one that we're looking to take out of anything that we put forward.
Okay, all right, no, understood. Well, I'm a little bit relieved that you may never be able to afford it, but nonetheless concerned that it was still considered. I would suggest that we're incredibly blessed to have the parklands around our city, and organisations such as yours are well placed to leverage them. The last thing we'd want to see, especially being the Parklands Authority, parks, lands, green space, is synthetic pitches used when we have an abundance of a beautiful, rich soil to grow grass on. I think it would be patently absurd to consider putting synthetic pitches down, much in the same spirit that Stephanie suggested that we might like to keep the lawn tennis courts, and along the same lines that Craig was saying, we're talking about hard surfaces and that sort of thing. I mean, any sort of synthetic pitch or any sort of hard court for a tennis court, I would have to consider as an alienation with regards to the parklands. And so I'd have to, personally, I would be incorporating that. If you're going from soil and grass to something hard, a harder substance, which I suppose in the future, at the end of its useful life, would then need to be remediated, I would actually consider that an alienation, and then I'd actually pour that square meterage into the footprint that you're asking for as well, because that's essentially what it is. It's an alienation of green open space. So I just wanted to make that point. I'm glad to hear that a synthetic pitch probably isn't going to be in the final proposal. But other than that, it looks fairly good, and we always want to see more people using the parklands. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, DLM. I have Ben next.
Yeah, look, as well to offer my thanks and to the point Craig made before, I think it's great that these come to us early. I think what you've set out is the infrastructure, your key needs, and I guess the bones that we can sort of build on. And so my comments in support of the directions that you've set out. One is, and it's topical for tonight, we're looking at building design guidelines. I think any next steps that you take around infrastructure should address those and respond to that in a positive way. But I guess the key one for me is we've seen the infrastructure and recognising that what's driving it is greater participation and more diversity in participation. I think what would help in taking the next step is how do you tie this into the context of the parklands, the neighbourhoods around it, and importantly, I guess the place qualities, that those squares, there's a lot of space around them, and rather than seeing them as leftover spaces, how do we actually use that to tie it all together? So to bring more trees into it, to think of the amenity of those spaces that help frame some of the sports facilities, that help connect some of it. Where are the pathways? Where's the lighting? How do we ensure that people can move from car parking into those spaces safely and efficiently? But also, how does the investment that you're doing, and again, encourage you to work with the administration, how does this add to the day-to-day quality of that area of the parklands as well, that it's not necessarily large tracts of grassland, but we can use landscaping, we can use other elements to break it up and give it added value.
Thank you, Ben. I'll just check, Jess, Kirstine, Alison, are there any comments from you? No? All good. I have a couple of questions. I'm just from an interest point of view, how and who conducted the facility audit?
That was done by a company called Inside Edge, who are sports facility planners.
Okay. The other question is, which actually goes back to public use, is how do the public know when they can use it? Or is it just that they randomly turn up, and if there's nobody there, then they know that they can, and then they might be halfway through a game and somebody will turn off and say, no, you have to get off. So is the public able to book a space, or is it just a sort of random process?
So we have an online bookings form, and whilst it's down at the moment, so in case you just jump on there straight away to have a look, because it's just being upgraded, but you can see sort of shaded out times of when it's available or booked for structured sport, which is generally sort of 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. some nights, not all nights, depending on the field, and then some weekends as well. And that's not necessarily Adelaide University use, but it might be, you know, a junior footy club or a cricket club, or we have lots of the country footy clubs using the parklands for training and those sorts of things. So you can get a guide. It doesn't show you who's using it, but it shows whether or not it's available or not.
Okay. So again, like my colleagues are concerned about the hard courts, would like to know what the square meterage is, because it's, I like Stephanie thought it was 300, so I must have missed the other 80. We do understand the need for facilities that were created for men only to play to be improved so that women and children can also play on those spaces. I was concerned about a comment that you made, Jeremy, that you said something about the City Council was contributing to the hard courts. I'm not aware of any contribution by us to hard courts.
There was a grant application by TNSSA to Adelaide City Council to contribute to those courts about 12 or 18 months ago. I can find full details of that, but I'm pretty sure that through one of the Adelaide City Council grants, there was some money allocated towards that.
Okay, I might have to follow that one up. I'm having been on APLA as well, I'm not aware of it. So, Ray, did you want to comment on that? Yep.
Yeah, so that was approved by council through the Recreation Sport Facilities Grants program. I think it was obviously not the one that you've just looked at now, so it would have been the previous years. But the money was given back, so the project hasn't proceeded.
All right. Did that go through APLA?
No, so there was only the funding. So that was going through the Rec and Sport Facilities grants, so that only went through committee and council. Okay,
so can we just from a process point of view, it would be really great if there's sport and rec grants that are going for specific things, particularly if it's around hard courts, that APLA has line of sight to some of those, because I from an APLA point of view, I don't recall it at all. Just as a a process. I wouldn't like to think that there are grants going through for development of things like hard courts that Adelaide hasn't seen or is aware of. I don't have, and the other one, Martin, I saw you shaking your head. I think the grandstand is state heritage listed, isn't it? Yep, okay, good, all right. Members, if there's no other questions, I'm just checking my little hands there, no. Thank you, Jeremy and Michelle, for that presentation, and I do echo the sentiment of the other board members. Thank you for bringing it in early so that you get some feedback from us. Are there any other questions that you have of the board before we go to the next presentation?
No.
No?
Just thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will go then, members, to we have a second presentation tonight, item 7.2, which is the Adelaide Parklands Management Strategy. And Martin, I think you're doing this one. We're going to go to a shared screen in a moment. We hope. No, you're muted. You'll have to turn your mic on. Can't hear you. Everybody is able to mute and unmute themselves. If you're having trouble, I can ask Judy to see if she can unmute you. Oh, you're back.
That's better. Thank you. So can everyone hear me now and see the presentation?
We can't see the presentation yet, but we can hear you.
Okay. Try again.
We love technology.
Is that better? Can you see it now?
No, sorry.
We did get this one in our papers, though.
Yeah, so it was distributed earlier today. Has everyone had a chance to read it?
Sorry, Judy, what was that?
Would you like me to share? I've got a copy.
Thank you.
That would be great, thank you. That doesn't seem to be happening there either. Ah, beautiful.
There we are. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Judy.
Yeah, so this was distributed earlier today, and I hope you've had a chance to read it. The Adelaide Parklands Management Strategy is the document that's adopted by both the state government and the City of Adelaide. And the purpose of the strategy in the Adelaide Parklands Act is to identify goals, set priorities, and identify strategies with respect to the management of parklands. The current strategy was largely developed during 2015 and refined during 2016. It was adopted by Council in December 2016 and by the Minister in August 2017. So basically it's about 4 years old. And according to the Adelaide Parklands Act, the authority must undertake a comprehensive review of the strategy at least once in every 5 years. So given the new board composition, it's probably timely to commence that review now. As a precursor to that review, we will be visiting various aspects of the current document, and we've elected to start by looking at what evolved to be one of the main themes of the strategy, and that is addressing the various tensions evident in the management of the parklands. Tensions around car parking, built form events and facilities. What do I mean by tensions? Well, I mean such things as the need to provide fit for purpose sports facilities, as we saw in the previous presentation, while limiting built form on the parklands. And the other example is the need to facilitate access to the parklands without bituminizing large expenses for car parking. I should point out though that the strategy doesn't confine itself to these issues. It also aspires to many enhancements, such as more lighting, more artwork, more promenades, more avenues, better riparian landscapes. So the question to members is really, do you think this is still a valid approach for the strategy, and should it be continued as part of this review? I'll hand over for discussion.
Okay, we didn't actually go through the presentation. I'm not sure whether there was any of the pages that you wanted to show there. Members, if...
What we've done is pulled out a few key points from the Minister's Forward and the board's, the Adelaide Parklands Authority's introduction to the strategy. So that gives, particularly that page there, gives a few examples of the approach taken to balancing those tensions.
Thank you, Martin. Members, if you could raise your electronic hand, and if, again, I'll ask you to unmute yourself once I call your name. No? No comments? Thank you, Stephanie. I'll just have to, thank you.
Hi, sorry, Martin, you caught me on the hop. I just wanted to open it up again. The one, I think, you know, they're valid, the directions that you've identified, but I wanted to check one of the key tensions that seem to keep arising is the sort of, you know, fundamental land uses, and, you know, in particular, the confusing directions that we get from all different documents, you know, about what is and what land uses are and are not anticipated. So to me, I don't know if that's in there, but that would be a key approach, not just tensions between buildings and parklands, car parking, blah, blah, but the tensions which arise with, you know, suggesting whether it's commercial hotels, whether it's office administration buildings, these are all, you know, retail. Although, you know, at the moment, I think the management strategy has a motherhood statement that says something about we don't see the parklands being used for commercial, generally for commercial land uses. But I just think it's something that probably needs to be an approach, actually looking at what land uses are anticipating and maybe defining them better than we have to date.
I can comment on that if you like.
Yeah.
I think there is a clause in the strategy regarding commercial uses, and they're really permitted where they support outdoor recreational use and provide some greater community purpose. So it's not open slather in terms of commercialisation, but I think it's fair to say that the strategy does not include a list of prohibited uses.
I just think it needs, we could do with more clarification in that, and, you know, and reflecting the actual statutory principles of the Act specifically in that way. So I just think that that's another approach that we could perhaps add to the ones. Okay, I see, actually now I've got the right page. Yeah, without commercialising public space, but yeah, I guess that comes under that overhead statement, but maybe maybe we just need, when we go into the detail, to tease that out better than it has been to date in the document. That's my only comment.
Members, does anybody else have comments? If not, we will, oh, here we go. I've got Jess and then Christine. You'll have to unmute yourself. Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Possibly a question for you, Martin, and sorry, I think I'm just trying to understand the review itself. So the review, is there scope for like any updates as part of that review to the document, or the document itself doesn't actually change until the end of its life in 2025? Is that right?
The review that's identified in the Act doesn't limit the extent of the review, so it could be as small or as large as the board wants. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So updates to the actual strategy can come about as of the review, or?
Yeah, certainly it could be updated at any time.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right time to mention it, if we're just talking about the specific theme that has been raised. But one thing that, from my perspective, I'd really love to approach in the review is just a little bit more presence, you know, in terms of Ghana inclusion. Now that, you know, a native title kind of has been achieved, and that all happened, you know, after the strategy came into place. So that's just something I'd love to start looking into, is how can we, you know, work closer with the Ghana community to increase that presence in the Adelaide Parklands management strategy, given that the times have changed a bit now.
Thanks, Jess. I think it's also, given that there is no limit in terms of the extent of the review, we probably need to allocate some decent amount of time to go through the Parklands management strategy, you know, from where to go, and make sure that it's still as relevant and that we can update it with, you know, including things around Ghana. I have next, oh sorry, I've got Christine.
Thanks, Lord Mayor, and thanks, Martin. I really support Jess's comments there. I think that's, and I think it also came up as in our last discussion as well, so I think that's a great contribution. I had a question really around timing, and I think it also relates to previous comments made around the scope of the review. It would be really great for us to be thinking about this as we're doing visits to the parklands as well. I think if we take a really active approach to considering what we might want to review in the strategies, the document itself, but it's trying to bring it to life more. And I think being able to consider, you know, a policy or a document like this as a strategic framework, but actually really thinking about how we might use it in a live way. And I think it could really be brought to life if it was supported by those site visits that you mentioned, Martin. I was really thinking.
Would members be open to some time on the weekend? I don't know how that works. I know everybody's working, that's all. It's like if we could perhaps, you know, consolidate some of the, as you say, Christine, bringing that management strategy to life would be great. If we could sort of move around the spaces and have a look at it in the context of the management strategy would be great.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps can we have a look at that if everybody's all right?
I'm just currently exploring how many people are allowed on a bus at one time. So once we've found out,
I think we need bikes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Let's get on some city bikes. We'll find out where the gaps in the cycle
bicycles. We've got a Parklands trail. Let's use it.
Okay. I'm all for that. So,
Thank
and
you.
I was thinking perhaps of Victoria Park as the first, Packapacanthe as first off the rank. That would allow us to look at the site that's the subject of one of the reports tonight in terms of the wetlands,
yeah,
and perhaps how the strategy applies to that area.
that would be great. I have Stephanie, thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment, when we did this last strategy, and Stephen was involved in that too, it was a huge undertaking. We formed an independent project advisory group. Alison was there too, I think, some of the time, and which met almost bi-monthly over at least a year or more, I think maybe a year. So I'm just wondering, Martin, how you envisage us undertaking the task this time around. Do you envisage it being a subcommittee of APLA or bringing it to APLA each time? You know, I think APLA could do the job, but it did involve a lot of, 2-hour meetings over a year or two to get to. So what are you envisaging?
Well, during the last review, there was what was called a project advisory group established, which involved people from state government, Stephen, and adjoining councils. So it was broadening the input into the strategy. That certainly was a useful model. We could look at doing that again, but it's really up to the board. I think a committee is an option. APLA, as you probably know, can establish subcommittees of those people who are particularly interested in pursuing that. So it's really up to the board.
I think, Martin, that the whole board should be involved. We're quite a new board. We're not starting the strategy from scratch. It is actually a review of the strategy, and just to make sure that there are any other inputs that need to be included in the strategy, or just having a look at whether things have changed significantly. The strategy isn't that old per se, and it's a big undertaking to do the strategy from scratch, but this is a midpoint review rather than starting all over. I do think that it would be a great way for the board to really engage with the strategy on an ongoing basis if we can actually do that together, rather than doing subcommittees or project advisory. I think, given that this is a review point, I think we can just work through it fairly quickly over the next few months. I have Ben, and then I have Ben. The hands are going up and disappearing.
And I almost took my hand down, but thank you, Lord Mayor. Just to reinforce your point there, that I think it is a strategy. I, through other associations, saw how some of it came about. I think it's been really well received and really well recognised by other industry, like AILA, the Landscape Architects Association. I think it's been awarded, given the direction it's taken and the leadership it did. So I think our review should respect that, and also recognise that strategies need time to develop as well. So absolutely how we can enhance it. And I think Jess picked up a really important point. But yeah, just, I guess, managing our expectations going into it.
And I think that's probably a good word, Ben. It is about enhancing the strategy, just making sure that those things are relevant, and things that have come up, as Jess mentioned, are incorporated in any review. It's not a wholesale, let's start from scratch. I do have Shanti. Shanti, did you wish to speak? I can't see you, but I know that you're there. You'll have to unmute yourself, Shanti.
Sorry, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Okay.
Lord Mayor, thank you. All of those comments are absolutely important and relevant. One of the things that Rick and Martin and Michelle are working on is an audit of what's been achieved and what hasn't been achieved in the strategy as well. And so we will bring that material through to the board so that the board has a better appreciation of, where the strategy itself is at from a monitoring point of view, and that will help inform what else may need to be done going forward with the strategy. And the other thing I thought I might add is we might, based on the feedback of the board, come up with a bit of a project scope as to how we might think we might be able to look at reviewing the strategy with a bit of a timeline as well.
That would be very handy. And for members, the discussion that we've had is really about how to keep this document live, given that this is one of the key deliverables of APLA, and hence the audit, so we can see what has been achieved so far. Also, actually, what's in our next sort of 12 months, 2-year plans for delivery, so that members have a really good sense of where we're up to with the strategy itself. I think we need to keep it on the agenda even if it's a quarterly update, and some of the things that were requested from members can also feed into that in terms of net gain, loss of parklands and all of those data points, so that we can monitor properly. And we've had a really good chat about how we can bring in some of that data and monitoring over the next little while, which I think will help us a lot. I have Deputy Lord Mayor. You'll have to unmute yourself, Alex. Okay.
I have learned it's taken a while though. Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Martin, for prompting the conversation. Just when it comes to discussions about land use and sort of the principles we might apply to that, I'd be very loath for an update to the strategy to, I guess, further restrict uses, not necessarily because we necessarily want to allow proposals that come to us, but I think it goes to the idea of, disruption, innovation, and what have you. Land use, just like many other things, is going to change markedly over the coming years, and this strategy does have to last for a few more years before it's significantly updated. I would suggest that sort of the principles you apply to land use in the parklands, instead of being, sort of a decently sized list of things that you can do, it should be a very short list of things that you can't do and that are ruled out by default. I think if you provided a list of things that you can do and said that this is an exhaustive list, that by virtue of having that list precludes any sort of innovative ideas and whatever. I mean, a few years ago, we might not have imagined something like a tree walk or that sort of thing. And so if you had on a list that you preclude any sort of commercial activity on the parklands, then we would have excluded that as well. So just wanted to factor that in the discussion. I think it's good, and it sets good, clear parameters to have a list of things that you can't do. That's quite short and allows for people to still come to us with new ideas about things that they might want to put to us for doing in the parklands.
Thank you. We can have a look at that. I think that's my understanding of the basis of good policy. Let us have a look. I have Shanti. Have I got you there again? I'm not sure. My apologies.
You do have me again.
Thank you.
Lord Mayor, I just need to remind members that the City of Adelaide has got a development plan, soon to be the Planning and Design Code, and it's really important to be aware that that is actually the policy instrument that drives land use. Not that this document shouldn't be informing that, but they do need to work in concert with one another, and to actually understand the role of each document is actually just what I wanted to just alert members to.
Thank you. Now, thank you. I'm just checking, Deputy Lord Mayor, have you raised your hand again, or is it just not quite been?
Sorry, do I have to put it down myself?
Yes, you do. I'm sorry.
I shall.
I wasn't successful in getting co-hosting duties tonight. We had a little hiccup.
Oh, you've been demoted.
Sorry, members, if that's all, I think that's really good feedback, and I'm actually hoping that this will be a really good exercise for us to do together and bring that document to life. So I'm actually looking forward to it. I think it'll be a great thing for us to do as a new board. I'm going to move on in the essence of time. So I'm going to item 8 on the agenda, There are 5 reports with recommendations for the board to consider tonight. Item 8.1 is the Brown Hill and Keswick Creek stormwater management projects in the South Parklands. And I hope that he is. I'm going to invite Matt Morrissey to provide a brief introduction. Matt, if you can unmute yourself, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor, and good evening, members. I won't hold you too long. I think tonight I'll just introduce the project team who are here to respond to any questions that you may have. So we have Peter, who is the project director and represents the Brown Hill Keswick Creek board for the project delivery. We have Angelo, who's from Procure PM, who's the project manager responsible for the delivery and can talk to the construction timelines, contract management, etc. And we have Olivia and Robin from Tonkin and Design Flow, who are the technical consultants for the project for any of those technical queries. So I'd probably like to hand over, if I can, to Peter just to give a bit of an update on the report that you have in front of you tonight. And then open up for questions.
Okay, so members, we're going to be informal before we go to moving the recommendations, so that I will invite comments and questions. Thank you, Matthew. So, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. My questions are mainly around sort of just understanding, I guess in first instance, I suppose the overall cost for what's being proposed in Park 16 and Park 20 separately, because I'm reading them as separate projects.
Was that a question or?
Yes, no, that's
okay.
my question. Sorry, that's my first question.
Matthew, are you able to answer that one? Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to check, is Angelo and Peter online? I'm just struggling.
They are there.
Yes, we are here. Yes.
Okay, well, I might hand to the team to respond.
Sure. Did you want me to take that, Angelo? Yeah, so the project is funded jointly by the 5 constituent councils of the Brown Hill Keswick Creek Stormwater Board, and with supporting funds from the Stormwater Management Authority. The preliminary cost estimates that we have for delivery of the Park 16 works is in the order of $20.5 million, with an additional $5 million for the Park 20 Creek works. So we're looking at a total cost of 25.5 as a preliminary cost estimate, and that's currently being refined on the basis of the 100% design plans.
Jesus. Okay. And so how is that? Can you explain how that's funded by the authority? So do the 5 councils each pay 20% of that, or?
Yeah, sure. So it's not in equal proportions. The stormwater management plan, which was adopted and gazetted in 2016, considered the extent to which each of the councils contributes to flooding issues within the catchment, and also the benefit that each of the councils will achieve by delivery of project works, and the capital contributions of each of the 5 constituent councils are based on those 2 issues. So it's certainly not an equal split. The 5 different councils each have different capital contributions that they make to their portion of the cost.
Yeah, and so
I might be able to help a little bit there, Deputy Lord Mayor. So, of the 5 councils, Adelaide contributes, I think it's 8%, followed by Mitcham, which is 9%. I think Unley was 20%, Torrens was 49%, and I've missed one council.
49%, yeah. Burnside is 12%.
This is 49%. Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. That's not such a scary figure then. Thank you.
That's right.
Okay. The other questions I had predominantly around the engagement with Ghana that's occurred to date. just because I'm conscious if you're putting in quite a significant wetland and moving soil around and all those sorts of things, you're going to get potentially artifacts and what have you come out. So could you just give me a bit of a run through of the sort of consultation? I know you've had a walk around the site and that sort of thing, but what level of consultation have you had with Ghana, and what concerns have they shared, if any?
Yeah, the level of consultation with Ghana is, I think it's twofold. We have a wider, kind of more broad project strategy, which looks at, you know, the Brown Hill Keswick Creek Stormwater Project as a whole, and, you know, the ongoing relationship we have with Ghana for the whole of the project. And then on a specific project basis, we've engaged with Ghana and undertaken site surveys. So we have identified some, you know, some moderate and higher risk areas, as well as some areas which are considered quite low risk in terms of discoveries. And we are preparing a cultural heritage management plan that will inform our construction program and really, you know, set some pretty stringent requirements around, you know, monitoring on site that will be required when the construction starts. We're also engaging with Ghana and have established a working group to look at the landscape design to ensure the landscape plantings and the results we have with our landscape design really encompass some of the cultural heritage stories that the Ghana representatives want to see through the parklands.
Oh, good, very good. And so when it comes to that land management plan, that will be drawn up in consultation with them.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So as an example, we're delivering a project within the City of Unley at the moment. We have one of those plans in place. We did make a discovery on site in the City of Unley, and, you know, the plan worked perfectly. We had monitors on site. The bone that was discovered was recognised within a couple of hours. It was confirmed as a sheep bone. Works continued on, and Ghana representatives and our archaeologists were really satisfied with how that process played out. So we're looking at a similar process for the wetlands project.
Okay, good. That's encouraging. So at what point, assuming this is all approved sort of by council, at what point would the plan be drawn up?
It's underway at the moment. So the site surveys have been completed, and the cultural heritage management plan is being prepared right now.
Good. Would I thank you for that answer, Lord Mayor? Would I be able to get an undertaking from the CEO or whomever's present from administration that once that plan is finalised and has gone through the Ghana consultation, I could get a copy of it, or APLA could get a copy of it?
I think that probably would come back into APLA, perhaps, Matthew, if I can see you there. So if you can do that, take that as an undertaking, that would be great.
Certainly will. Thank you.
Okay. And members, you will see that there is a proposed amendment from Jessica, which we'll get to in a moment. I had Craig next.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I had some comments and a question or two around the removal of the trees. There was a significant theme which came up through the public consultation where people were concerned about that. And this proposal comes at a time when there is increasing public concern about the loss of significant regulated and mature trees in the community. And I suspect that concern is only going to grow further. In previous presentations to APLA around removal of mature trees, we've actually had, as part of our information we've been given, images of the trees, which has been very, very useful to set the trees in context. And certainly that's happened in two previous instances. Looking through the proposal here, there is a high number of trees being considered for removal, and they have significant value. And I mean, there is one line there around that a recognition that the replacement is going to take a while to get back to a similar amenity. The reality is of 100, by my count, 132 mature trees. That's a significant number of years when I can imagine the The larger ones will be there for over 100 years. I have no information about that, but I can make some assumptions. So we're talking about a huge amount of growth, which we are going to be removing. The replacement number, I mean, normally with these sorts of things, you're talking about a handful of trees being replaced by hundreds. We're talking about almost a like for like, 132 being replaced by 160. So we're kind of replacing a whole lot of extraordinary large trees with a whole lot of seedlings. So I suppose
I will just actually stop. I think they if we can just get some feedback on that, because I think they're more than seedlings. I think they're 3-metre trees or something that they're looking at. Matthew or the team, could someone just respond to what trees are being replanted?
Oh, shouldn't talk about the regulated.
Oh, so just on your comment that the 120 trees being mature trees, that includes even very small and young trees. So the number, if you look at the mature trees, is actually much less. It's not insignificant. In terms of what we're proposing to plant, we are proposing tube stock and robin size 45
litre trees.
45 litre trees we will be planting.
So can talk about the number of regulated versus total number.
Yeah, and just on that, so the number of we've got 2 significant trees and 4 regulated trees that are being removed, and minimising tree removal, especially minimising the impacts on the regulated and significant trees, has been a large part of the design focus. And we do have some supporting information that I believe we can ask someone to bring up, which will show an overview of the project and the constraints, and may provide a little bit of context as to why those trees are earmarked to be removed.
So you're proposing to present that now?
We can, if that would be of assistance.
I think my question was more around the some images.
Of the trees that we've got also in that supporting information, we've got images of the 4 regulated and 2 significant trees that are proposed for removal. That be of assistance.
That would be welcome. And just quickly, can I just clarify, you mentioned 120 trees. By my calculation, in terms of the recommendations, it's 132 trees. Is that right?
The numbers in the report are correct. I was just going off the top of my head. In terms of the actual mature trees, it's 61 in Park 20 and 14 in Park 16. So if we could have a look at slide 3, please. So these are 2 of the 4 trees in Park 20 that are tagged for potential removal. So we've had a full arborist assessment done of all of the trees that are potentially impacted by the work, and the remaining 2 trees in Park 20 are on the next page. And if we want to have a look at the ones in Park 16, they're on page number 7. So those, yeah.
So I'm wondering why this wasn't given to us earlier, because it's really hard to take it in on the spot.
Yeah, sure. We had a late request for this information, so we have gathered it up so that we had it on hand. But yeah, it obviously hasn't been included within the actual.
Sorry, report. Craig. When I was going through the agenda, it was a request from me to actually get photos of the trees to bring into APLA. So apologies, we didn't have that earlier, but I thought it was important that we could see what we were talking about.
Yeah, because it's challenging to take it in terms of the images and consider and be able to go on the site and see them in context as well. as part of the consideration. It is the request is a significant number of loss of urban tree canopy at a time when public concern is very strong.
So could we just go to slide number 6, which I realise it won't replace a visit to site, but it will provide a little bit of context for the tree removals in part 16. On page number 6 of the supporting. So those 2 red circles are the regulated trees that are potentially being removed or proposed for removal.
I'll keep going. I have Stephen and then Ben. Members, I will ask you if you can put your electronic hand down once you've spoken, that would be good too. So Stephen, I think you're next, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to support Craig's concerns. There does seem to be a view that the replacement of mature trees with juvenile trees is perfectly reasonable, and that a century of growth is neither here nor there. There's also, I've got to choose my words carefully, but there's also a great prejudice against exotic trees, and in some cases that's justified, but in many cases it's not. They perform a valuable function in the landscape. In the context of climate change, who knows where we're going to end up. So when I see the report, and it is a very large report, and I guess I've got no indication of whether this is an engineering solution and the trees are in the way and this is the easiest way to do it, and or whether this has been very carefully considered, and I'm respectful of the people involved, but I don't see it in the report, so it's hard to have any response other than the one that Craig has already presented. So just reinforcing that, for me the soft landscape is the critical path. How can we go from what's there now to what's proposed, and I certainly accept what's proposed in principle, but often the shortest line between the 2 points isn't necessarily the best solution. So it's not clear enough for me, and it's not really defensible in its current form.
Could I add a bit of context as to the effort that's been made to retain as many trees as we can? If we could go to slide number 5, please, just one above. Just to give you an idea of what we're trying to do in this space is a lot of competing demands. So if we can scroll up one slide. So the blue is representing the wetland footprint, and then the red lines around it are the flood containment bank, if you like. And so what we're trying to do is provide a space that not only provides a wetland environment, but is also providing flood retention to protect downstream properties. And so in terms of accommodating that within the space, it's predominantly in the old racecourse area. And we've worked around trees as we feel best we can. So in that area, there's 2 significant trees there you can see crossed out in black. And the blue of the wetland, you can see how it pushes up to the north. And we have a pinch point where we've got an embankment which is there for flood control. And the problem is the batters extend out to another great stand of trees further to the north. And so it's really a balancing act in trying to deliver these multiple objectives with, unfortunately, the loss of a couple of trees. I'm not trying to downplay that. The other point I'd make is these wetlands also include another 135,000 tube stock plants, which aren't trees, but they're also adding to the biodiversity of the area. So we feel the overall net benefit to the biodiversity is quite strong. And while none of us like to see a reduction in tree canopy, we have gone to a lot of design effort to try and minimise any sort of tree losses.
Thank you. I have Ben next. Thank you. And then Rob, and I'll just check. I've also got Deputy Lord Mayor, but I'm not sure whether that's still there from last time, but I'll go to Ben now.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And Robin, thank you for that. I guess that's probably some of the story that's missing in the report. Picking up on Craig and Stephen's comments before, is just understanding the effort that the design has gone to retain as many as we can, and the reasons why these trees need to go. So I think that is an important piece in helping us make decisions and find support. I guess when I went through the report, the lack of, there could be more information there around the design that's coming back. It was focused on the infrastructure, and that's important, but I guess more support around the landscape that comes back in, how we're activating this area to balance off the loss that we all see and recognise the change that is coming. So I encourage that with more reports that we do find that balance, and the photography certainly helps. These plans and this additional information certainly helps inform why these decisions need to be made.
Thank you, Ben. I have Rob and then Stephanie. Rob, I'll get you to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think I'm probably just echoing the discomfort about the idea that as an organisation that's charged with responsibility to advise in relation to the retention of the qualities of the parklands, that, here are some of the things that are the kind of the giants of the parklands, and we regularly require people to either not do things or to take extraordinary lengths to work their way around these magnificent specimens that we've got. I don't know what their ages are, but presumably they could be 150 years plus old. And, while obviously trees, whether they're tube stock or whether they're 3 metre high trees coming in, they'll grow. It'll be well beyond our lifetimes, which is not so much the point. I understand that there's a kind of a difficult, a difficult balancing game that goes on, but I suppose I would want to feel reassured that extraordinary lengths had been gone to try and retain these trees, rather than we thought hard about it and it's too hard. Are there any options that they're regulated for a reason. They're regulated so that we keep them, as opposed to being regulated so that we can unregulate them and cut them down.
If I can just say, and look, I agree entirely with your sentiment, and I feel we should have really prepared a presentation for you to give you a full rundown of the design and sort of the philosophy of how we design wetlands and water flow, and how we try and avoid stagnant areas and so on. We did present one probably
January last year.
January last year, and felt that gave a good sort of summary of our approach, I suppose. But perhaps we need to do that. A presentation would give us a chance to really better articulate the thinking that's gone behind it, the philosophy of wetland design, and the constraints that's also faced with that. I agree completely, and I can't emphasise enough how much we've really tried to minimise any tree losses as best we can with the design, and feel that the current design has a good balance of all the competing demands of what's put on this space.
I think that is probably the missing piece, and I'm not sure about other members, but I think that we would probably appreciate a Wetlands 101 session so that we can understand the significance of what you are putting in front of us, which is a mighty big removal of trees, including those regulated and significant ones. And I think it would be good if we could better understand what that means and why you are unable to design around that. So I'm getting lots of nods for members. I'm just wondering whether we can schedule something before we actually make a decision on this. Is there a time constraint that you need in terms of this approval or going through? Because it also, I would consider the same thing is required for council before they review it as well.
Did you want to speak to the council process?
I can speak to the overall program through the chair. It's a fairly large earthworks project, so we're dealing with extensive amount of soil that we need to excavate and stockpile and sort through to create the wetlands. And that's got a fairly extensive time frame against that. Earthworks is not a type of activity that you want to do during the winter period. It's certainly more favourable to do it over the drier months. So we're really keen to be in the field and starting this work in and around September, if possible. We're actually even looking at potentially doing some early works around July, August, just to prepare for the larger work. So certainly we are constrained somewhat by the weather conditions and by the dry months, and certainly September is the time that we want to be in there starting to do some of the major earthworks.
Okay, Matt, can I ask you when you were hoping to take this into council, because they'll need a recommendation from and feedback from APLA?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It was proposed to be on the next committee meeting and the following council meeting following this resolution tonight.
Okay, which is July. Would that cause any difficulties if it didn't go through until August?
I'll refer to the team. I think Peter is probably best placed to answer this from a project perspective.
Yeah, our program is quite tight in terms of needing to start the procurement process so that we can get on site, as Angelo said, in the optimum time of the year, not just within weather restraints, but also ensuring we work with stakeholders and users of the parklands, because it is quite a heavily used space that we're wanting to work in and around. Taking our recommendation to the August council meeting would lead to delays, and it would lead to us starting on site much later than we ideally would.
I think the other component to this as well, sorry, is that we also want to make sure that we've done enough work ahead of the landscaping period, which is really important. We want to pick the right month next year after the summer period to put all of the plants in. As Robin has pointed out, we've got well over 100,000 plants that form part of this wetland, and the optimum planting time is certainly from April onwards, when the weather is much more kinder. So getting our earthworks done now is really important.
Okay, so with that in mind, given there are 4 weeks between the next committee meeting of council committee and council meeting in July, I'm wondering whether we can schedule something in the next couple of weeks that takes APLA through that, perhaps just with this single item agenda, and then we can actually go through the recommendation. Would members feel comfortable with that?
Lord Mayor, I think that's a good idea. Does that mean we'd be deferring this until after that?
Well, I think we might defer the recommendation. What I would like is, if there's any more questions, I have Stephanie still to speak, but I think if there's any more discussion, I'd also like to hear from Jessica so that we can actually look at the information before us. Clinton, I know that you're there. Is there any comment you'd like to make on that?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I was going to ask that exact same question that Deputy Lord Mayor asked. Would that require a deferral of this item tonight? Our intention would be to hopefully continue through the process with committee and council on the timeline that we'd put forward in the forward agenda. So if there was a way for the members of APLA to receive the information and make a recommendation to council prior to the July council meeting, that would be our preferred position.
Well, what I'd probably suggest, we actually have a planning meeting on the 18th. If there's a single agenda, perhaps we can bring that single agenda item in at the same time, so that we defer this evening, and then we can actually step through. You can provide us with more information around the wetlands itself, the work that's been done in the lead up to, so that we have a better understanding. Would members be comfortable with that? Yep, excellent, fantastic. So with that, I will continue with members. If there's any questions that you want to ask tonight, given that we'll get a further briefing within the next 2 weeks and go to that recommendation, I will also ask for someone to move deferral, but I do want to hear from Stephanie and also from Jess. So Stephanie, I'll go to you first, unless there's anything we can deal with at the later meeting.
I was just going to make the quick comment that I'm actually quite comfortable with this, and I think it's probably because maybe I think the presentation on what was going on in that wetlands did occur last January ahead of all these when the new board formed, and I think we had a couple of presentations, in fact, because very similar concerns were raised at the time, if I remember clearly. And you know, what looks like a shocking number of trees being removed is actually, on my understanding, a whole lot of, you know, woody weeded elm, you know, those elms that take, I think it's elms that take over the creek. And knowing that area really well, having lived right near there a while back, I was actually at the end of the day comfortable with it. But I can understand that if you hadn't seen all that, that you know, seeing those numbers of trees that are being removed is you know, is worrying and confronting. So I support the, and I'm happy to move that we defer this until that meeting on the 18th and do it as a special item.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Steph, on that. Jessica, are you happy to speak this evening on your, just so that we get an understanding around the proposed amendment?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, happy to speak to that. I've just proposed the amendment. Yeah, I'm aware of some of the great work that the project team has done, working collaboratively with members of the Kaurna community on this project. And really the proposed amendment was just from a place of, I suppose, seeking that would continue through the life of the project, and not just be something at the beginning that then may or may not eventuate right through to the end. So that's just something from a Kaurna perspective that I'd really like to see happen, and I think that the Kaurna community would really appreciate that opportunity to work with the project team and really ensure that Kaurna heritage is really evident in the end result.
Okay, thanks, Jess. We're not doing the amendment tonight, but I just thought it would be good if you had an opportunity to just speak to that. So I have got Stephanie, who has moved to deferral. I will look for a seconder. Thank you, Craig. And so members, I don't think we need any further discussion. If everybody's happy to go to the vote, those in favour, just by show of hands. Those against, that is carried. Thank you. And so I'll, Martin, if we can, we'll regroup in just terms of finding a time that suits everybody to do a briefing on this single item and then work through the recommendation. That would be great.
Yes,
members, that takes us, thank you. And thank you to the team for your attendance, and Matt and Clinton, we will work with you so that we have something that comes through. Thank you for your attendance tonight.
Thank you.
Item 8.2. Item 8.2 is the Adelaide Parklands Building Design Guidelines. I'm going to, that's on page 112 of your papers. I'm going to invite Shanti to provide an introduction to this one. I can't see you, but I know you're there. Now, Shanti, are you still with us? Okay, I seem to have lost Shanti for the moment. So what I might do is go to, because without Shanti, I don't think I've actually got, I'm just trying to see if I've got Chris there.
Hi, Chris Diamond.
Is Chris there? There's Chris. And also I do, just checking, I've still got Clinton with us. So again, I might just invite any comments. There she is. I might invite any comments or questions. Shanti, did you just want to introduce this item?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Sorry, I needed a comfort stop. Lord Mayor,
that's all right, I understand.
This document was presented into APLA late last year, and it has been through an extensive period of consultation with the community, as well as with a range of bodies, including the Institute of Architects, ODASA and the like. AILA as well. We've received really positive feedback and input on this piece of work, and Chris, who has led this work really capably, has made it his business to make sure that those who need to be informed about it and its contents is with us tonight, and he's done a really good job. I think what it will do going forward is it will update the old guidelines, which clearly have had their day. They're sort of not fit for purpose in the current environment. I think what these guidelines will do is to help set a new standard for building design in the parklands.
Thank you, Shanti. Members, are there any questions of Shanti or of Chris? I have Stephanie, followed by Christine.
Hi, sorry, I seem to be talking to every single one tonight. Shanti, and it's been, concerns have been raised in the community, and this relates to the transferal of policy from our current development plan on the parklands into the planning code policy for the parklands. And the the push, as is stated in the resolution, that these building guidelines enhance what is there in the planning code from now on. And I agree with all that and support all that. My only concern, and if you could comment, is that I think we did notice in the report and the submission that was made by council to the planning department that there was concern about a loss, considerable loss of policy for the parklands in the new design code, the new planning and design code. So I just wanted to voice that concern, and where we've had guidelines specific to particular parks, and provisions in the development plan about footprint or whatever it might be, that we are still pushing to have that refinement of policy and not just rely on the building design guidelines to achieve that. Do you understand? So definite policy around building envelopes or building footprints or whatever it might be.
Through the Lord Mayor, thank you for that question, Stephanie. it's fair to say that Rick and his team are beavering away with working with DIPTI on the code content as it relates to the parklands, not just insofar as building design guidelines are concerned, but the whole question of policy that apply in the parklands as well as land use. We're hopeful that we are going to be able to continue that dialogue with the department with a positive outcome. Obviously, there's an enormous advocacy piece that we have to put forward to ensure that both the views of council and APLA are heard insofar as the parklands is concerned. It's fair to say as well that it's a work in progress, and until we actually see the final version of what that work in progress looks like, there are still lots of questions.
Thank you. I have Christine.
Thank you. Shanti, I had a couple of questions and then a comment as well. And the first one relates to the question that Stephanie asked, and I was wondering what the status of the guidelines would be in the new planning system. And it's great to hear that work is being done and Rick's working collaboratively with the department. It might also be that we could seek some advice on what is the best instrument within the Act to be able to, you know, are there more things we could be doing? I mean, I'm still getting my head around what, you know, practice notes do and guidelines do and how they relate to actually what's within the code, and, you know, what would also help us in terms of being able to, if we needed to revise the design guidelines in a way that, you know, in the future that wouldn't require code amendments. So I think working through that detail with the department would be great. So that was probably, I think that question was answered in your response to Stephanie's question. And the other one was in relation to the case study, noting that Odas has given a lot of feedback on this already, so I won't go into necessarily any detail on the overall document, but I did have a comment around whether or not you'd considered decoupling the reference scheme or the case study at the back of the guidelines document. I think whilst it's useful in terms of illustrating some of the things that could be used, I wonder whether we could get in a bit of a tangle with it being misinterpreted. You know, if it actually carries too much weight, it could actually become a tricky thing for us to be able to, you know, talk against something that may look like it's meeting that case study, but still isn't the best outcome for a particular project. So, you know, case studies are fantastic, and it would be great to get some more local case studies as well that we could point to. But I wonder whether you'd thought about decoupling it so that it doesn't actually form part of the document itself.
Thank you, through the Lord Mayor, Kirstine. I'll respond to the first question because I think your question was a bit more pointed, and we are actually looking at the potential idea of design standards because design standards are actually a policy instrument that is available to us through the PDI Act. We do have a fair bit of work to do to convince DIPTI that that is actually an appropriate mechanism to use. So any sort of guidance that you might have in facilitating that discussion, as well as advocating that as a potential solution might be appropriate. And on the question of the case study, yes, that's a really good question, one that's quite vexed because it could be potentially used inappropriately. And so it is something that perhaps we need to give some further thought to, and whether it's something that sits as a separate piece that gets brought out when appropriate rather than being the standard that gets adopted.
And it might be that, you know, having, you know, something that's less specific, but actually good precedents that you could point to that illustrate different things that we're trying to do might also assist there. And I also wanted to add that I just thought the consultation that was undertaken with this was excellent. It was really authentic, and we got a lot of good feedback, and certainly it was. We enjoyed looking at it in the office, and I know that Ayla had a good look at it as well as the AIA. So I think that's setting a really good example as to how we can review these documents, and seeking that expert opinion. I think it makes it sort of easier in a way to be able to support things when we know that they've been looked at very broadly. So I think the team should be congratulated on that as well.
Thank you, Christine. I have Rob. And then Ben.
I just had a few things ranging from pathetically pedantic to minorly pedantic. I just wanted, on page 10, the guidelines seem to be both singular and plural, and I think it'd be worth making up our mind about whether the guidelines is or the guidelines are. Very trivial. I just sort of wondered about the chapter heading, why do we need this part, which seemed kind of cute in some ways, but maybe a bit apologetic. And it might just be clearer to say what that part is. It's about design excellence. It's about the purpose. I wondered about the aspiration that removal and temporary structures should have the same level of design integrity as permanent structures. I kind of get the aspiration, but I just wonder whether that is unrealistically setting the bar a little high, and that maybe there's a different way to express the same aspiration. And then my last bit was just on the sustainability side of things, and I'd be completely advised here, but whether it's even worth specifying a Green Star rating in relation to the sustainability side of the buildings.
Shanti, did you or Chris want to respond?
Through the Lord Mayor, and thank you, Rob, for those pedantic questions. They're absolutely 100% really important, and we will make those corrections. And we might look at reviewing that question about, being really clear about purpose or design intent rather than asking questions in headings. And I might refer the question on the Green Star rating to Chris.
Thank you, Shanti, and thank you, members. I think, yeah, we can certainly employ a Green Star rating here, but to reinforce the fact that we're striving for best practice buildings now moving forward in the parklands in every respect. So very happy to add a Green Star rating to this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Ben.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Probably just to pick up a couple of other points there. I think the consultation has gone really well, and I think it's great that the city has reached out to the professional bodies and that they have in turn responded in support of the work that you've done. So I think it's a really good approach, both in advocacy, but also in a peer review sense. So that has been a really good step to see. I must admit, I do agree with Kirstine's comments as well around the case study, whether that's needed right now or whether as this starts to help find influence, we actually use those as live case studies and demonstrate both how the guidelines have assisted the process as well as inform the product of the design. And lastly, I guess it's a question to Shanti. Understanding the makeup of the board that we do have connection to the minister, is there anything that we as APLA can do to advocate for the guidelines and its recognition in the P&D code?
Through the Lord Mayor, thank you, Ben, for that question. Simply 100% yes.
So perhaps we can, on behalf of APLA, write formally to the Minister, also looking at design standards. Shanti, if you're happy to draft something to that extent.
Yes.
I will ask the board if they are comfortable with that. Yep. So perhaps if we can do an undertaking, and I'll circulate before that goes to the Minister. I have Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I just want to echo Rob's views, one on the grammar, just because I'm a little bit special like that, but more importantly on the Green Star rating, not least of all because I mentioned it myself some months ago when this came in. I'm just curious, Lord Mayor, just because at 4 in the recommendation we are endorsing the draft final guidelines for publication as presented in attachment B. Is an undertaking enough to get a Green Star rating incorporated into it, or I don't want to fluff around too much, but I want to have it in there.
I think what we could do is we could either ask for an undertaking that the guidelines are recirculated rather than, I think that's probably the easiest thing, if they can be recirculated so we can see those amendments.
Yes.
Would members be happy with that? I can see Chris nodding with that. So we can still endorse the guidelines with an undertaking that the amendments will be circulated to members. Yep, we're good with that, Shanti?
Great.
Yep.
Cool. Yep. That's easy then. Thank you,
Right.
and thanks to the team. I'm not an expert, but it's clear that it's had endorsement from those experts, so that's very, very pleasing. Thank you, Shanti, and your team.
And I will also add my thanks. I think it's a great piece of work, Shanti, and also Chris. Thank you. I think that it feels like it's had a fantastic consultation, that you've really reached out to all of those groups, and that's fed in really well. The separation of the case study, I think you've heard members quite clearly, and also a little bit of grammar and and the Green Star rating. So we'll look forward to a small amendment coming through to all members. So with that, I will go to the recommendation and I will seek a mover and a seconder. If I can have electronic hands, I have Deputy Lord Mayor moving. I'd look for a seconder. Thank you, Craig. Deputy Lord Mayor, did you wish to speak? No. Craig, did you wish to speak? Members, did anybody else wish to speak to the motion? I'll look to the electronic hands. If not, I'll go to the mover to sum up. Deputy Lord Mayor, do you wish to sum up? That was a thumbs up. Members will go to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you, members. We'll go to item point 8.3 on the agenda tonight, which is the Lowndes Boathouse Precinct Plan. And again, I'll ask Shanti to give us an introduction to this. Then members, you are very welcome to give comments or ask questions in an informal way before we'll go to the recommendation. Shanti?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Through the Lord Mayor, this piece of work was essentially as a result of a council resolution that we go forward and undertake some investigations to see what might be possible in that part of the world. Essentially, Chris again has worked on coming up with some ideas around how the Lowndes precinct itself could evolve into the future. It is an ideas piece, and it will need to obviously go into council for council to make a determination as to how it wishes to proceed with either implementing or putting a project plan forward over the next period of time, given budget constraints as well. So literally it is an idea. And I think it does, the way it's been documented actually helps to address some issues around stormwater and car parking, as well as building design as well.
Thank you, Shanti. Members, I will look to you for questions. I have Deputy Lord Mayor, followed by Craig, followed by Ben. Deputy Lord Mayor.
Sorry, my hand was lingering again. I'll take it down.
Then I'll not pay attention to your lingering hand, Deputy Lord Mayor. I'll go to Craig and then to Ben. Craig, you're muted. I'm sorry. I know.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. My apologies.
No. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions around. I was just wondering where, I suppose, what's provoked this, because I know there are issues in terms of poor design and stormwater and rough sleeping in lots of different parts of the parkland. So I'm wondering, sort of, I suppose, where this sits in terms of the various risks and priority ranking of activity within the parkland.
It is actually response at point 7. You'll see that there was a motion that came through the council in 2017. Chris, is there anything you want to add to that?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This originally, our focus on this area originally came out from Councillor Wilkinson's motion on notice to reinstate some heritage elements in the area, which was a gazebo, a lamp and a pontoon. In going down to the precinct and meeting with stakeholders, we were made aware of many other issues which they face on a regular basis. So then we went back to council saying, well, we've been made aware of all these other facts, and then we were instructed, well, we can go away and investigate a plan that addresses those, and then have that costed to report back, which is what we've done now. But I'll just add at this point as well that as we move forward towards committee, we will package up this costing into both a hierarchy of what's really most important initially, but also what can wait a little bit, but also into manageable and bite-sized chunks as we head over the next couple of years.
Thank you for that response. And also, I mean, and it's probably a bigger conversation, but about whether we have a role in that. But it's, I'd be fascinated to know where this area stacks up against other areas in terms of perceived risk or need for urgent upgrade or whatever, because I suppose to help us, guide us in our thinking about whether this is actually the #1 priority, or is it actually one of 10 that equally need attention.
The priority will, I guess to your question, Craig, the priority and the funding of that will be assessed by council. So APLA's role is advice around the information that's before you. I think I understand what you're asking, but I guess this has been in response to motions that have come through the council chamber. What we have here are the findings for improvement and opportunities that we can actually really look at the whole precinct. As Chris just mentioned there, we have competing funding priorities, and we're in an interesting post-COVID world, or coming out into a post-COVID world. So it would have to be a staged project, and it would have to get endorsement by the council before we moved ahead.
No worries. Thank you.
I will go to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. I'm down to one screen, so apologies, Chris, if this is obvious. But just two questions. Firstly, a statement that I think to move from the items to taking a wider contextual precinct approach is a really good one in balancing the different needs of that local area. So I think that's really good to come to us in that way. One simple question around the parking adjacent to where the Popeye at the back of Lowndes is, of whether 2 spaces is necessary there, and do we need to give that space up? And then the other question was just to understand Jolly's Lane. Was that looked at as part of the precinct? That's the bit that I haven't been able to check. And is there opportunity there as well?
Chris?
Yes.
Or
yes,
Shanti?
thank you. No, I'll take this one. Yes, Ben, you're spot on. The two car parks, which are Popeye's permit parks, they don't need to be immediately adjacent to their building. They could quite easily move out onto the street. And one of the issues that this precinct's faced is when cars do park in that area, people who are unfamiliar with the area that drive down Victoria Drive, they think, oh, there's cars in there, we must be allowed to park down there. So if we can remove all cars from the precinct, maybe except the proposed disabled parking, that would be a win. Jollies Lane was investigated. There's parking down there and turnaround facilities as well. And really that road, from what we learned in talking to stakeholders, really only services the Jollies end of the precinct. In fact, even some of Jollies' kitchen deliveries, the drivers who are quite savvy sneak around in front of the loungers and the rowing clubs and actually come to it from the eastern side. So this would again force the Jollies business to really use Jollies Lane and actually remove all vehicles from this precinct or as much as possible, making it a lot safer.
Thank you. Members, I have Kirstine.
Again, thank you. Again, just a comment really. I just wanted to say it's just great to see the clarity of the thinking here and the high quality work that's been done. So not really any comments about what's been proposed specifically, but it's such a valuable resource to have within council to be able to carry out this kind of work. And I completely agree with Ben, sort of looking at it sort of precinct wide is also excellent. So it'd be great if work could come forward to this level of quality and clarity again, and also just to congratulate Chris on the constructive engagement he's obviously had with tenants down in that location too. So I think it sets a really good standard.
Thank you, Christine. Members, I have Stephanie.
Yep, just a quick endorsement of the work that's been done. That's an area I use a lot with my bike group. We always stop at Lounders, and it could do with a bit more clarity and refinement. And I thoroughly endorse what Ben raised about the two car parks. That was the bit that jumped out at me when I looked at the plan. You know, is that necessary? And yes, let's get rid of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Members, sorry, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Just a quick question. I'm sure it's in here, but got caught up in more important issues that the designs have addressed. Did we get the heritage marquee or gazebo and lamppost in there as well?
I think it's addressed at point 10 of your paper. So through consultation, it was noted that the reinstatement of the historic elements was, as was requested in the previous decision, were considered to be I can't say that word. Superfluous in the context of the broader precinct-wide issues.
Interesting. It's just funny to see how it evolved, but okay, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a bit of a moment there, not being able to pronounce a word. That's interesting. Members, I am actually going to ask for a mover and a seconder. Is that Deputy Lord Mayor, is your hand? Oh, no, it's gone. So members, I'm looking for a mover. Thank you, Ben, and a seconder, Deputy Lord Mayor. Ben, did you wish to speak to the recommendation at all? No. Deputy Lord Mayor, did you wish to speak to the recommendation? No. Members? If not, I'll go to the mover to sum up. Ben? Thank you. I will actually make sure that we can hear that, because in the recording it only goes to you when you speak.
Okay, sorry, summed up.
Thank you, Ben. Members, to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you. Members, that takes us to item 8.4, which is the review of the Adelaide Parklands Events Management Plan 2016 to 2020. And I believe, I'm not sure if Noni's here or if Christy, are you doing this one?
I'm here actually just to say hello, members. and introduce Noni. I'm not going to talk for long, seems the hour, so Noni's here to talk you through it.
Thank you. Noni, if you'd like to just introduce this item, and again, members will take comments and questions before we go to the recommendation. Noni.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Members, the Adelaide Parklands Event Management Plan is our document that provides a framework and guidance to council, event organisers and the community around holding events within the parkland event sites. The APLEMP, we fondly refer to it as the APLEMP, is reviewed annually to ensure that we are able to provide clear and consistent advice to our customers when they're holding their events in the city. The report being presented to you this evening is providing an update on what has been achieved with the APLEMP over the last financial year. And it also outlines the next steps that we are working towards with the next iteration of the APLEMP, which it will be 2021 to 2025. We have commenced working on that, and we are aiming to bring that into APLA for consideration by December this year. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, members. Are there any questions or comments? I have Jessica. Jessica. There you go.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, just a comment really in terms of the next steps. And I'm sure it's already, you know, in train, but just a comment really regarding the Ghana cultural mapping, Adelaide Parklands cultural mapping project, and really love to see that tied in where at all possible with the update, just to really understand that in the context of holding events and how that might influence the next the next iteration of the APLEMP.
Noni, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you. I'll respond to that as the cultural mapping is happening with the wellbeing team as such. And yes, take those comments. Thank you, and feed them back to the team and see if we can incorporate them for your review.
Thank you. Members, if I have no other speakers or questions, I will actually look for a mover and a seconder. I need an electronic hand. Thank you, Craig. And a seconder. Oh, Craig, your hand has appeared. Okay, I have apologies. It's quite funny. These are going up and down like yo-yo. So I have Craig and I have a seconder in Rob Brookman. So Craig, did you wish to speak to the recommendation at all? If you can speak, that would be great.
No.
Thank you. Rob, did you wish to speak as seconder?
Nope.
Members, did anyone else wish to speak? If not, I'll go to the mover to sum up.
Summed up.
Thank you, Craig. Members, to the vote. Those in favour? Real hands. Those against? Thank you, members. That is carried. Members, that takes us, thank you, Noni, thank you, Christy. Members, that takes us to item 8.5 at page 205, which is the lighting strategy. And I will ask Shanti to introduce, to a brief introduction, and again, invite any questions or comments. Shanti.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This item again we did present into APLA late last year, and we've had work being undertaken in terms of preparing this lighting strategy to give some guidance as to what's appropriate lighting in the parklands. Commentary was received when we presented last year on this around, you know, consideration for environmental lighting, i.e. impacts on you know, native wildlife and impacts on the environment, as well as having consideration for provision of lighting to provide safety, particularly on our pathways that travel through the parklands. So essentially this work is to set the standard as to what sort of lighting is appropriate in the various precincts within the parklands.
Thank you, Shanti. Members, I do have 2 hands raised, but I'm not sure if that's from before. So Deputy Lord Mayor, did you wish to speak? Okay, thank you. And Rob, I have your hand. Did you wish to ask any comments or questions?
I just lowered my hand. Maybe I've left it up.
Thank you. Members, were there any comments or questions? Thank you, Kirstine.
Thank you. Thanks, Shanti. It's great to see this again, and I think it's going to be a really good reference document in lots of different areas or activities within the city. I know that we talk about it a lot at State Design Review, and to have something like this that we could point to as a consistent reference point will be very, very useful. We often try and get lighting strategies written into conditions with approval, so I will certainly welcome it in the work that we do here. I wondered whether there was also an opportunity, if it hasn't happened already, for Renewal SA to be briefed on this document to make sure that they're very aware of it. Clearly there's some very live opportunities where they could draw from the guidance and objectives of this document that we wouldn't want to miss. So I think making sure that it's elevated and they're appreciating it with all of the work they're currently doing, obviously in Festival Plaza and Lot 14. So that would be great. It probably has happened already, but I think there's some very, it would be very timely for that to happen once this has been approved, I think.
Thank you, Kirstine, and through the Lord Mayor for that. We will certainly make a point and an effort to make sure that we brief Renewal SA and Lord Mayor, I'm not sure whether it might even be appropriate to be briefing REPAC on this lighting strategy.
I'm very happy to do that. I'll work with the CEO on that, and I do actually have a meeting next week with Di Dixon from Lot 14, so I'll make sure that's brought to her attention as well. Members, are there any other questions or comments? If not, I will look for a mover. Thank you, Ben, and a seconder. Thank you, Kirstine. Ben, did you wish to speak at all?
Only to say, I think it's a really well put together document. I think these things can be quite dry and technical at times. I've seen others, whereas I think this one is really engaging. It talks to the importance of how we light our cities to bring people out and keep it both safe and appealing for people to spend time in it. But it also, in response to feedback, balances the environmental concerns. So I think it's a really positive document, and I think it positions the city really well to engage with developers as well as some of those larger state developments to push a higher standard.
Beautiful, thank you, Ben. Kirstine?
Nothing further to add to that. I thought that was really well put by Ben.
Thank you. Members, if anybody else would like to speak. If not, I'll go to the mover to sum up. Ben?
Summed up.
Thank you. Members to the vote, those in favour? Those against? Now, Stephen, I didn't see your vote.
I did vote yes. I didn't hold
thank you.
for long enough.
Sorry, I just need to make sure we can see everybody voting for the records. Thank you, members. That's great. That takes us to the last couple of items on the agenda. Any other business? There were no questions or notice or motions on notice at the time of the agenda publication. If there are any questions without notice, now I think the hands are still raised from the last item, but if there's any questions without notice, if not, we have actually added an item on the agenda just called discussion forums, and that is as we are trying to still operate as a board in the context of being an authority that has to work to the meeting regulations. We have added a discussion forum, so if there's any matters that members wish to bring up for either further discussion or for exploration by our support teams, this is the moment that we can do that, so it doesn't have to be formally done through a motion or a question on notice. Members, if there's nothing to this evening, then we'll just talk through that when we do our strategic planning workshop. You're good? I can't see any electronic hands, so if not, I will close the meeting. I am not sure when our next meeting is, but the next meeting is scheduled for July the 2nd. However, we will endeavour to have that meeting on item 8.1 prior to that, just for that single item agenda. Thank you very much for your attendance tonight. I think it's been a really good meeting and a full agenda. And I thank you all for your input and your time this evening. With that, I will bid thee farewell. Good night.
Good night all.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, everyone.
Night, Stephanie. It's like John Boy in the old. Night, John Boy. Night, Elizabeth. See you all.